Thank you. So I'm going to light the chalice and say our opening words. And tonight's opening words are by Gretchen Haley and Anne Lamott. So they're called Grace Meets Us Where We Are. There is nothing you need to bring with you to be welcome here. No right beliefs or proof of citizenship, no eternal optimism or clarity of conviction, no boundless courage or endless expertise. You do not need to know what brought you here or how you will solve that problem you are turning over and over and over in your mind. Your bills do not need to be paid and your checkbook can be a mess. Your children may have been up half the night, your hearing aids may not be working, and your knees may be creaking. You do not need to be already perfect or even halfway to belong in this circle where grace meets us where we are, but does not leave us as it found us. So I'm really pleased to introduce David Schoenberg. And David is a near native Atlantan who practices business, international and trusts and estates law from his home in Buckhead, an honors graduate of the University of Virginia, majoring in history, and a cum laude graduate of the University of Georgia Law School. Go Bulldogs. David is a leader in his Reformed Jewish synagogue, Temple Sinai, has taught both business law at the college level and comparative religion to Jewish teens. A current passage is Second Helpings Atlanta, a food rescue organization of which he has served as president. For fun, David regularly swims, plays tennis, pool, and poker, and tries to stay current on politics, sports, and pop culture. David serves on the board of Interfaith Atlanta and is the chair of the Interfaith Speakers Network, ISN. He recently joined the board of Actors Express, an in-town theater company, and made his debut as an extra in a TV movie, typecast as a Jew. So welcome, David. Please take it away.
Thanks very much, Margaret. I feel very much like I will be a quasi-expert because in some fashion, I am not a learned scholar of Judaism. I've practiced Judaism for my entire life, which at this point is over 62 years. I at one time considered going into the rabbinate, but they had other thoughts because, as I will tell you at some point if you ask, I wasn't really meant to be a rabbi. I was really meant to be a layperson. I have been presented with 3 questions to start out the evening with. I spent some time trying to answer those questions and realized that if I truly answered all of those questions, you all would be with me until tomorrow morning, and that's not what we've got in mind. So I'm going to try to walk through those questions relatively quickly. I'm happy to answer questions from you to the best of my ability. As an attorney, you know that I will be able to answer the questions without answering the questions if I don't know the answer, but I will try my best to give you an answer. And if I don't know, I certainly will let you know that as well. So without further ado, I do have a slide presentation and I'm gonna share my screen, maybe. Y'all can see that? Great. So the Interfaith Speakers Network of Atlanta is a program of Interfaith Atlanta. And normally what we do is we give a panel presentation with the 6 major religions of the world, each giving a quick overview of their respective religions, and then take questions from the audience. And we've spoken to over 30 different groups, from children to young adults, all the way to senior citizens, groups that are specialists like Red Cross volunteers, all kinds of different groups that we've spoken to, including adult education classes. This is a unique opportunity that is a test model where we are taking an hour and a half of time and focusing specifically on one religion. So this is a first. You guys are guinea pigs, and hopefully this will be the first of many opportunities to present in this fashion. I know that Shalina did a great job last week, and I'll try to live up to her high standards from last week. Now, of course, I'm supposed to know what you're supposed to do. There we go. Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. The practice of Judaism focuses upon living an ethical life, using traditions and religious practices to manifest these basic ethical truths. As practiced today, Judaism has many looks, from the strictest of observant Orthodox Jews to the least observant secular Jews. In the past 200 years, reformation of Judaism has resulted in the conservative, reform, reconstructionist, and renewal movements, as well as many smaller sects. Judaism is a monotheistic religion. Traditionally, Jews believe in one God, and I emphasize traditionally. The central prayer every Jew knows by heart, the Jewish creed, if you will, is known as the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, God is one. Jews believe that we are all created in God's image, and that it is each of our duties to heal our imperfect world. In Hebrew, that's known as tikkun olam, or healing the world. Jews are sometimes referred to as the people of the book or the people of the covenant. Judaism's central book is known as the Torah, sometimes referred to as the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, or the Old Testament by non-Jews, and we'll talk about that later on. Other central texts are the stories of the prophets and the written interpretations of Torah by historic leaders known as rabbis, and also that's known as the Talmud. Together, these three are referred to as the Tanakh. Together with oral traditions, proper ways to observe known as the halakha, these sacred texts and traditions have been passed along from generation to generation. In Hebrew, that's known as lador vador, generation to generation. Core values of Judaism include B'Tselem Elohim, that all people are made in God's image, Tzedek, justice, Chesed, loving kindness and compassion, Tzedakah, which is a broad term for charity, a sense of community, Kehillah, both among fellow Jews and with humankind, and a striving for peace, Shalom. And as you may know, Shalom is also the greeting one would give when one meets someone. It means hello, it means goodbye, and it also means peace. Jewish tradition states that men and women are totally equal, though more traditional sects of Judaism differentiate observance requirements dependent upon gender. Torah contains 613 commandments, mitzvot, to which Jews are obligated, including the central 10 commandments. Many mitzvot incorporate the core values of treating others justly, providing help to the less privileged, and seeking peace at home and throughout our world. When the world is repaired, the Messiah will come, and Jews' work on earth will be completed. So there are many places within the Jewish tradition where one should treat your fellow human as you would treat yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinfolk. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, in Leviticus. Adam, the first man, is all of our actual and spiritual father. As such, we are all united as one. Two of Judaism's greatest scholars, Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the century before Jesus, identified this as the core of Jewish values. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. This is a chart that shows the largest 15 countries with Jews located in them. And as you can see, the United States and Israel compose well over 90% of the Jews in the world, 48% in the United States, 46% in Israel. This is as of 2021, I believe. And then you can see as you go down from there, the next most, France, Canada, UK, Argentina, all 2 to 1, and down into the small percentages, many of which are countries in Europe and the Eastern Europe. In the United States, here's the list of the top 10 Jewish communities in the United States. As you see, Atlanta is now number 9 in the number of Jews. This says it's about 119.8. I've always used the number 125,000 recently. It's hard to know exactly who is a Jew and who isn't a Jew. Something like 30% of Jews actually affiliate with the congregation. About 70% do not. So, but if you ask them, they'll tell you they're Jewish. How they're Jewish, maybe their mother, maybe their father, maybe they converted but don't belong to a synagogue. So it's hard to know exactly who is and who isn't, except for they identify themselves. But as you see, we're a relatively small percentage, about 2% of the Atlanta population. Interestingly, the Muslim population of Atlanta is almost identical, about 125,000 Muslims in the Atlanta metro area, about half of whom are of Middle Eastern descent and about half of whom are African-American Muslim converts. So that just kind of gives you a comparison of in our particular community, in the Atlanta community. So the second question that I was given was to speak about how we educate our youth. And these are what I came up with in terms of the main ways that Jewish youth are given comfort with an understanding of what their religion is and how they practice it. From the age of about 5, most children go to religious day school on Sundays. They also start attending Hebrew school, usually around 2nd grade, to start the process of learning Hebrew in order to be able to conduct and lead services for their bar mitzvah, which is when they turn 13, or bat mitzvah for a girl when she turns 13. There also are day schools. Jewish day schools have become much more prevalent. Today, there are over 900 in the United States. About 2/3 of them are on the more religious side, and about 1/3 are on the more liberal side, Reform day schools. Home is where you really are going to become a Jew at heart. Your parents and your family instilling Jewish values, celebrating holidays, having Judaism as a daily part of your life, as a feeling. As I was talking about this topic recently with someone else, everything about my home that I grew up in had Jewish symbols and pictures and other elements that were always around. And though my parents didn't necessarily talk about it, it was always there. It was always a part of who we were and how we were being raised. Studies show that Jewish camping and Jewish youth groups are among the most successful ways of keeping Jewish youth engaged
Are we
in
ready?
Judaism.
Okay.
So there are Jewish overnight camps throughout the United States and Canada, and some in Europe as well. Many connections are made, lifelong connections, including marriages, out of people who meet at Jewish day camps, at Jewish overnight camps. Jewish youth groups also provide a social outlet for Jewish kids who go to different high schools, mostly, although we have youth groups that go as young as 3rd grade at my synagogue. There are obviously quite a few museums out there that preserve history. The Holocaust Museum in New York and in DC. There's a brand new museum in New Orleans for those of you who might travel to New Orleans, the Jewish Museum of the South, which I understand is fantastic, just opened within the last few months. And then one of the ways that my community is very keen on educating both young adults and as well as adults is travel, both to Israel and to other Jewish communities within and without the United States. I'd say we, prior to COVID, had at least one, if not two, international trips for adults. Our youth travel to Jewish communities. There's a pretty significant number of places to visit in the DC area. So they go up there pretty often, usually in their 10th grade year. And then I would say Israel is a location that probably 50 to 70% of all Jews have been to at some point in their lives. I had the privilege to go when I was 14 and have been 2 other times since. So adult education, Judaism believes that that education never stops. And I think that probably is consistent with your own beliefs, that there's always opportunity to learn. Torah study is continuous. The Torah, again, is the 5 books of Moses. And we read the Torah from front to back each year, annually. There are sections that are identified with each week of the year. And so prior to services on Saturday morning in most congregations in the United States, there's an opportunity to study and learn about that particular section of the Torah and how it's relevant to our lives today. Each year, a different section of that portion might be pulled out by whichever rabbi is teaching the session. And so it's never a dull moment. You never are studying the same thing. And even if you are, from year to year, new things happen and you have different ideas. Almost every congregation has adult education of some sort. We have regular classes during the week that are conducted. We have guest speakers all the time. We have a film series, you name it. There's education opportunities if you're interested. We almost always have someone come in as a scholar in residence on a particular subject. We have artists in residence. Sometimes they're musicians. Sometimes they're true artists, writers, or painters or that sort of thing. Again, opportunities to learn. We talked about travel, and then we're known as the people of the book. Almost every Jew has an extensive library, whether it's now on Kindle or not, I don't know. But we tend to read a lot about all sorts of topics, including Jewish topics. There are Jewish book clubs, and the word chavruta means study partner. And the best way to study, according to our scholars, is in partnership with someone else, where you go back and forth and teach each other. I wanted to give you a quick overview of Jewish holidays. You're probably familiar with most of them, but a few of them maybe you aren't. Shabbat is the Sabbath. It's Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. It is a holy day, as holy as any other holiday in the year. It's the opportunity to take a pause. God created the earth in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. And we emulate that by taking a break and stopping and smelling the roses, if you will. High Holy Days, Slichot is the preliminary holiday leading up to the 2 holidays that you all are probably most familiar with, Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. The whole month preceding the High Holy Days is a period of self-reflection where one is is supposed to both apologize and ask for forgiveness from your fellow person for any slights or things you may have done that were bad in the preceding year, and then to ask for forgiveness from the deity, from God, for offenses you may have committed against God. You ask, and the way that it works is you're hoping that you will improve and that you won't make those mistakes again the following year, but we're all human and we likely will. So what you're actually asking for forgiveness for is the mistakes you're about to make in the upcoming year. And if you make it till the following high holy days, then apparently you at least were given a reprieve. So the next three, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, are known as the festival holidays. And those three holidays are holidays that are in the Torah. They're actually commanded to be celebrated. Sukkot is where we create huts. It was a holiday associated with the harvest, and you live outside in a hut for a week, and you eat in the hut, and you pray in the hut, and you do your harvest. Passover is the holiday of freedom, celebrating the Exodus from Egypt. Most people know about that because they've seen seen a Jew or two eating matzah, the unleavened bread, during that week and complaining bitterly. Shavuot is the holiday celebrating the giving of the Torah, and that's in the spring and is much less well known in the community, not only in the general community, but also in the Jewish community, because it usually occurs after the school year is out. And so the kids are gone from Sunday school. They never learn about Shavuot, and it's sort of this lost holiday. Purim is the holiday that we just celebrated this week, where we revel in the fact that the bad guy Haman was defeated, who was an anti-Semite, wanted to kill all the Jews, and Queen Esther and her uncle/cousin Mordecai saved the Jewish people. So it's a holiday of celebration. You are supposed to get so drunk that you can't tell the good guy from the bad guy. And we had a very adult Purim spiel where you tell the story of Purim, where our rabbis cross-dressed and acted out the Purim story. One of our rabbis in particular looks particularly good in evening gown. And if you search long and hard on the internet, I think it's now posted on Facebook, which he's not happy about. The next holiday is the one you all know most probably about, which is Hanukkah, which is a very minor holiday in the Jewish calendar. It's celebrated for 8 days. It happens to occur around the time of Christmas. It has taken on much more meaning and much more importance in the American Jewish mindset because of its time similarity to Christmas. But I will just say that you see that I've spelled it two different ways. There are many ways you can spell Hanukkah, but the key to spelling Hanukkah is it should always have 8 letters because there are 8 days and 8 candles. And so however you spell it, and I don't care what you choose, you can spell it any way you want, but it needs to have 8 letters. Okay? I've taught you something. The next is Yom HaSomething. Yom is the word for day in Hebrew, and there are tons of Jewish holodays that celebrate different things like Veterans Day, Israel Independence Day, Holocaust Memorial Day, you name it, Yom HaSomething or other. There are probably 10 of those. And then, as I wrote there are about 50 other Jewish holidays on the Jewish calendar, most of which, unless you're extremely observant, you have no clue that they're happening, but they're there. The last question that I got was misconceptions. So I have come up with 10 misconceptions about Jews. And you can read them. I will comment slightly on a few of them. At this point, there are various studies that show that Jews are between 6 and 12% people of color. So we aren't all Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, but that's what most people seem to think of as Jews, but that's not all Jews. There are a significant number of Jews who are born Jewish, who are not white and not from Eastern Europe originally. The Torah is not really the Old Testament. The Torah is 5 books of Moses. The Tanakh includes the 5 books of Moses, the oral traditions, and the writings of the rabbis. Your Old Testament also includes some other works. So we include some of the Psalms. We include some of the other books, Book of Samuel, and then there's some additional books like the Book of Ruth, all of which are sometimes referred to as Torah, but really are more appropriate referred to as Tanakh. But for ease of understanding for the American public, the word Old Testament is the easiest way for you to at least get a grasp on, to some extent, what Torah is. The third one I'll just skip past and tell you that there are plenty of Jews that are none of the above. Number 4, there are Jews throughout the country. There are Jews in small communities. There are tiny little pockets of Jews in all kinds of countries, wide and far. They range from deepest, darkest Africa to China to Singapore, you name it. There are small Jewish communities. Unfortunately, the more the rural communities exist, the more they're dying out. Most younger Jews go off to school and end up living in larger cities. While Judaism does not proselytize per se, there are plenty of opportunities if one wants to study to become a Jew. It takes study. It takes at least 6 to 9 months of pursuit of the process. The rule of thumb is that a rabbi, when asked if one can convert, has to say no 3 times. And after he says no 3 times, or she says no 3 times, then you can start the studying process. So you got to be persistent. There is a concept of the Messiah. It's much more prevalent in more Orthodox communities. The concept that we're all working to improve the world, and ultimately the Messiah will come, and at that point, we'll all be in a better place. There's an old saying that 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It's very common that we'll fight amongst ourselves, have disagreements, and so forth between people of the same denomination, people of different denominations, people in the same household. It doesn't matter. There's lots of disagreement. Now, there's a perception that may have a little bit of truth to it, that there's a certain amount of combating anti-Semitism and protecting of our fellow Jews, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with their politics or with their viewpoints on certain practices. But there's certainly plenty of disagreement. Just look at Israel and the fact that it has over 25 different political parties, and you see that they're not all sticking together. Many Jews are not pro-Israel. Many Jews are not happy with the Israeli government as it is currently constituted. And so there are Jews, including some of my close friends, who are not happy with the state of Israel. Now, I think at the end of the day, do they believe that the state of Israel should exist? Yes, but they're not all gung-ho. Israel is always right. Our rabbis are well learned, but they are not any closer to God than anyone else. There's no such thing in Judaism as being called to the rabbinate. you decide that it's the profession you want to have, you study, and then you go out and you either teach or you're a leader of a community. So rabbis are respected, provided that they do the right thing. But rabbis can fall just like anybody else, can make mistakes and sin or do bad acts. The last one I put on there, which is an old misconception, and I think is probably not as true today as it used to be, with the success of the Israeli Defense Force, with a lot more activism of Jews, that we no longer are necessarily perceived as a submissive people and anti-war. There are Jews in the military. My father served for 30 years in the United States Air Force and went to West Point. And there are Jews of every stripe when it comes to the viewpoint on how we protect our country and how we deal with conflict. So with that, here's a picture I found on the internet of wide range of Jews looking very diverse. I like the picture, so I wanted to share it with you. And I'll go back, I think, stop sharing. We'll talk about those at the end, but I'll leave it at that and open conversation and for questions.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. So everybody feel free to ask a question, either unmute and ask or put it in the chat.
I can pose a question, Margaret, if you're ready.
Oh, please.
Yeah, David, thank you very much. First of all, are you a Reform? Are you in a Reform congregation?
I am.
Among people of that ilk within the faith, how do you deal with you study the first 5 books of our Old Testament, which you're calling the Torah, and there's a lot of stuff in there that it's hard for an educated person today to believe literally. And I think most people in the Christian tradition see the story of Adam and Eve and the flood and all that as sort of an allegory or a myth. How do you, as a Reformed Jew, relate to those stories in there in terms of when you and others study those as teenagers? Are they presented as factual, or are they understood to be somewhat of a mythology of the people?
So in Reform Judaism, which is obviously the more progressive end of the Jewish tradition, we view Torah as something to learn from and not something that is literal. Biblical scholars have pretty clearly proven that the Torah was written in different times and by different people over the course of centuries. And there are sections that are not consistent. There are sections that are similar, but not quite the same. And it was probably finalized somewhere around, and I'm going to probably blow this, but maybe it's 1,200 years before the Common Era, which you all call, when Jesus was on the earth. In Torah study, which I attend pretty regularly on Saturday mornings, we address all kinds of topics that are no longer relevant directly in our lives. For example, a few weeks ago, we were studying sacrifice at the temple, which is the first part of the book of Leviticus. And we don't sacrifice anymore. But the concept of what each of the different sacrifices were about, we can learn from. And each one has a different nuance to why you're sacrificing. One might be for forgiveness. One might be for thankfulness. One might be for giving to others. So each of the parsha, the portions, we take and we dissect and we splice and dice and try to determine why it's relevant or where it isn't relevant, and where it's misogynistic, we point it out, and where we recognize that it was written at a time and a place and a way to keep the Jewish community together at the time, and you had to have rules to unite around. And there's still value to the book, and there's still value, even more so, to the many, many, many commentaries that each passage has generated from learned scholars, from rabbis, from lay people who read something and say, I thought this. And I would say that at almost every Torah study, some layperson makes a comment that you go, oh, wow, that's a cool thought. Never thought about that, or never thought about it that way. So, sometimes it's clever, sometimes it's just insightful, and sometimes it's just turning something on its complete ear and looking at something in a different way. So, I don't know if I answered the question, but we're definitely not literalists. And we teach the kids. You asked me about the children. Children are not taught literal Bible anymore. I mean, they're told the stories, but they're told the stories in the fashion of these. One of the things that's important to recognize, and I'm sure that any of you who've studied the Bible at any length know, is that our founding fathers, our patriarchs and matriarchs, had tons and tons of flaws. And we like to emphasize the flaws. We like to talk about all the different things that are wrong with them and how they aren't good people, not necessarily bad people, but they aren't great people all the time. And they make mistakes, and we can learn from their mistakes, and we can move forward from what they did. There's a lot of deception in the Bible. It's like every week we have another opportunity to see somebody deceiving somebody else. So it's definitely not taught with a lot of literalism anymore. And the concept of a God sitting on a throne as a male, with a scepter and sort of ruling from above, has been as far removed from children's early ideas of God as possible. And that's true in all denominations. That's not just in Reform. Orthodox Jews are not taught about a God with a white beard.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
First is, if I want to marry a Jewish man, do I have to convert to Judaism?
Great question. If you're marrying an Orthodox Jewish man, the answer is yes. And again, the Orthodox rabbi who would be converting you would be going through a lot of testing to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons and you're converting to Judaism, not just converting for the sake of marrying a Jewish man. In conservative and Reform traditions, the practice, or the current state of affairs, is much more fluid. I would say 25 to 30 years ago, it would be relatively hard, maybe more than that, maybe 40 years ago, it would be relatively hard to find a rabbi who would marry a Jew to a non-Jew. But currently, the vast majority of more progressive rabbis, both conservative and Reform Jews, will marry Jews to non-Jews if they are planning to raise their children in the Jewish faith. And if they're already past childbearing age, they'll just say, celebrate the holidays or appreciate the Jewish values and move on. But it's at this point something in the neighborhood of, I want to say the number I've read recently is 70% of all Jewish people marry people who aren't Jewish. And it's a huge concern in the Jewish community as to the continuity of the religion. And if you don't welcome the non-Jew into the community, ultimately the community will disappear. So the modern view is almost every rabbi will convert. Will marry non-Jews to Jews. It's just a matter of what else they ask you about and making sure that Jewish values and at least the concepts that are in the faith have some chance of being in the home after the marriage.
Next, can you explain the importance of keeping kosher and how different Jews practice that?
Sure. So there are 613 mitzvot. Those are commandments in a broad sense of what the term means. There are 613 different things that you are supposed to do as a Jew according to the Torah. And you have to nitpick and parse out exactly what each one is, because you and I, as lay people, could not just read the Torah and say, oh, I see. Number one is this. Number two is that. It's not written that way. You have to pick them. You have to find them. And the rabbis have found what those 613 mitzvot are. One of the 613 is keeping kosher. And at least a third of the 613 are related to sacrifice in the temple. Since the first and second temple are destroyed, they're all irrelevant because nobody's practicing those 200 plus mitzvot. Modern Orthodox Jews believe that one is to always follow all of these rules. And one of the rules, and the one that most people just sort of know about, is keeping kosher. And keeping kosher is not eating certain things that are prescribed or forbidden in the Bible, like pork, like shellfish, like mixing milk and meat. There are volumes of commentary on what all that means. And this day and age, there are all kinds of pork substitutes. You can have shellfish substitutes. They make tofu into anything these days. And so an Orthodox Jew who keeps kosher won't eat pork, but they'll eat something that tastes just like bacon. More liberal Jews, some keep kosher, some are vegans, some are vegetarians, some are, they may keep kosher because that means something to them, or it gives them a sense of belonging and following certain traditions. I would say modern Reform rabbis are probably about 2/3 to 3/4 follow some version of kashrut, but their congregants don't. Some do. It's not against the rules to keep kosher, but I would say fewer than 5% in a Reform congregation, maybe 25 to 30% in a conservative congregation keep kosher at this point. There are a lot of other mitzvot, like not working on the Sabbath, that people follow in their own ways. Everyone has the freedom to honor the Sabbath in a way that they feel most is meaningful to them. Likewise, one doesn't have to pray. One should pray 3 times a day. If you're Orthodox, you do. If you are more conservative or liberal, or renewal, you may pray or you may not pray. I've gone from never going to synagogue for prayer to going almost every week because I enjoy it. What I'm doing and how I'm praying is a different question that I'll answer if you have. But the truth is that following the mitzvot, we now effectively pick and choose which ones are meaningful to us, and that's how, as a more modern Jew.
Another question is, can you share what your idea of God is if it isn't the white guy with a beard?
Sure. So I'll start with the fact that I mentioned that Judaism is a monotheistic religion. But if you poll the Jews of America, at least, and probably the Jews of Israel as well, you would discover that fewer than 50% actually believe in God, or at least they'll tell you that they don't believe in God. So what makes them Jewish if they don't actually believe in God? And then you get into, well, what is it that you do believe in? And sometimes it's science, and sometimes it's, I like nature and I think nature is cool. And sometimes it's some sort of a hybrid of well, there has to be something out there, but I have no idea what it is, so I'm not really going to focus too much on it. One of the things that is important to note is that modern Judaism, and to a large extent Judaism through time, was a religion of activity. Do the right thing, treat your fellow person right. It doesn't really matter what your belief system is, as long as you're doing it correctly. So if you treat your fellow person right and you act accordingly to the laws of God and laws of man, then that's all that really matters. And unlike a religion of faith, there doesn't have to be this declaration of, I believe in God. Now, I told you, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is the Lord is our God, God is one. That's from earliest of childhood, you learn that phrase. And what it really means in my mind, and you asked what I believe is God, what that means is there aren't a whole group of people, things, and other and outside influences that are separate and distinct. It's all one and the same thing. And the God of Jews is the same as the God of Christians, is the same as the God of Muslims or Buddhists or whomever. I personally don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about what the deity is, if there is a deity. I mentioned to you that I applied to rabbinical school and did not end up going. One of the questions that the rabbinical panel asked me was, what do I think about God? And my response was, not much. And I meant it in two different ways. I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about God. And I also think that our world's kind of a messed up place. And if the God is out there who's supposed to be actively solving some of our world problems, it is not doing a very good job of it. So that answer was looked at with a little bit of, this guy is not meant to be a rabbi. He needs to go back to being a layperson. But I at the point I was making that statement, I already knew that I was probably not going to rabbinical school. I was going through the process just for the sake of learning about it. But in any event, you would discover that many, 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 many Jews in the United States and in Israel don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about God. There's a lot of emphasis in bringing God back into the discussion. I have mixed thoughts about it personally. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so in that sense, is it kind of a humanist approach to religion?
Yeah, I mean, it ties into also my personal views on afterlife, which are basically, I'm influencing everyone that I interact with in some small, maybe inconceivable, imperceptible way, and that's my afterlife. So whether it's specifically me, that anybody recognizes that they're doing something because I said, I did something to impact how they're now operating, is not important. What is important is that I'm doing what I can do to improve the world and to interact with others like you all this evening to, be a positive person. And hopefully one minor grain of whatever I say tonight will go with you and will, allow you to interact with your fellows that you run into, whether it's another Jewish person or whether it's, just a random person that you meet on the street. And that perhaps will, make the world just a teeny tiny bit better. And that to me is the crux of Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology.
Thank you. We have another one actually appropriate. Are there special practices around death for Jews? Are Jews generally buried or cremated?
Wonderful question for the man who's in charge of the burial society for my congregation. There are rituals, there are traditional, lots of traditions around Jewish death and dying. The last words on your mouth from your mouth are supposed to be the Shema. That's actually, that prayer is traditionally said as you fall asleep at night, because you don't know if you're going to wake up in the morning. So you're supposed to say the Shema just in case you don't wake up in the morning. And you're also supposed to say the Shema when you wake up in the morning, because you're thankful that God has allowed you to survive another night of sleep. You don't know what happened in those 7 hours, but you know that you're still here, or you think you're still here at least. So Jews traditionally bury rapidly within 24 to 48 hours. There is a mindset that we are ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So you're buried in a pine box, which is plain, which can disintegrate quickly. We do not embalm. The concept is to get the mourning process started. There are rituals associated with preparing the person for burial, which, as I was saying, I'm in charge of that team of men. Men do it for men, women do it for women. It's a 4-step process where you wash the body, where you ritually cleanse the body, where you put the body into a shroud, and then you put the body into the coffin. And throughout this process, we say prayers and we treat the body with respect. It's viewed that the soul doesn't leave the body until such time as it's buried. So, the person is sort of with you while you're preparing him or her for burial. Modern Judaism certainly permits cremation. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, whether you're going to ashes today or, in 50 years, is not at this point viewed as problematic. Obviously, we can't do the rituals that are associated with Jewish burial if you're being cremated, although just recently, actually literally within the last couple of months, we started doing a version of the rituals for families who want us to do prayers over their loved one. So we actually have modified our service to allow us to do a certain level of blessing over the deceased person. There are rituals after death. There's something called Shiva, which is the word 7. So the first 7 days after a person has died are the serious mourning period, where nothing is to be done except for amongst the immediate family, except for recall the loved one. You have gatherings together, you pray every night and so forth. Then there's a 30-day mourning period, Shloshim, that's 30, where you do less, but you can go to work, but you don't celebrate, you don't have any, holidays and that sort of, you don't actively enjoy life. After the 30 days, then there's certain other things you're allowed to do. And at the end of a year, it's officially the time when you should put up the stone to mark the grave site, and you're supposed to stop mourning. You never forget your loved one. Annually, we recall the loved one on the anniversary of their death. It's called Yortzeit, which is a Yiddish term for year, marking the year of death, I guess. And so annually at synagogue on the Friday, Saturday to Shabbat closest to your loved one's death, you would actually recite their name out loud and say a prayer in memory of them. You're supposed to do that for your parents, your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters, your children, and your grandchildren. Bring them back to life, at least remember them and think positive thoughts about them. So that was a long answer to yes, we have lots of traditions and rituals associated with death and dying.
Thank you. Shalina had a couple of questions.
Hey, David.
Hi, Shalina.
Hey, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but this is amazing. You know how I'm learning more about your faith than I have had the opportunity to do when we are together talking about our sessions. So this is what it's all about, all of us sitting here and talking about our traditions. So some of the questions, and I think another Kay also wanted to ask you about kind of the concept of reward and punishment afterlife, because it seems like that's the way people used to stay good. So if there is no, reward, then why be good, right? So that's the concept. So that's what I was wondering, how is the afterlife connected to that? And you had said something, and I've heard this before too, that when things are good, then the work of a Jew on earth is done. Now, is that taken by every Jew as their own interpretation of what that is? Some might go political, others might go, moral charity, and et cetera, et cetera.
Great questions. I'll start with reward and punishment. There's a lot of skepticism among Jews. And I won't say that all Jews are skeptical, but many of us are. And so we don't know whether there's going to be something after the life that we know here on earth. So most of us view the reward as being able to live our lives on this earth and experience all the good in the world. And it's good, it's enough to experience whatever we experience on this planet. If there happens to be something beyond that we don't know about for sure, so be it. And hopefully if you've been a quote unquote good person, you'll end up with those rewards. Jews don't really believe in a heaven and a hell. There is something called Gehenna, which is sort of heaven-like. I would say many Orthodox Jews probably believe that they're headed towards some other place. There's also a phrase, the world to come, which for a more liberal Jew probably means the Messianic age, the point when we're all kind of living in harmony. But to a more traditional Jew, it might mean a place outside of the world that we recognize and know. Obviously, Shalina, you haven't met too many Jewish mothers, because we all live with our Jewish mothers, and there do not need to be rewards and punishment. There just needs to be the threat of a punishment, and we all act good. My mother loves, I have an 85-year-old mother and a 96-year-old father. And my 85-year-old mother regularly tells me, I'm here to torment you the rest of your life. And what she means by that is, whether she's here or not, she's going to be in my ear when she's dead. So,
well, I must tell you, David, that, this is interesting, because even in the Torah, the way the Israeli community talks to God, nobody else can get away with that. So I think you've got that attitude and that kind of a cushion from the beginning.
So the word Israel actually means struggle.
Right.
And Jacob struggled with God. The story of Jacob's ladder is all about Jacob struggling with God. And, before Jacob, they were all pretty passive, and Abraham did what he was told and took Isaac up onto the mountain and was willing to sacrifice him, a story that many of us have a lot of problems with. But Jacob, who was really the first Jew, the first Israelite, said, hey, wait a second, I'm fighting with you. I'm going to talk back to you. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to question everything. And that concept of questioning, of always not accepting whatever is laid out before you, but actually asking more questions and not necessarily accepting what authority tells you, but in questioning, that's all very Jewish. There's a reason that so many of us become lawyers. we're inclined toward that by our tradition to constantly be, in a certain questioning or arguing back and forth. This concept of chavruta, which is studying one-on-one, is disputing what your partner says and saying, no, I think it means this. And they come back and say, no, I think it means this. And maybe you never agree, but you are learning from each other as you're talking through topics. So that was good and evil. I don't remember what Shalina was, what else you asked me about. But I should have written it down. You remember what else you were asking me about?
I think so. There was one about this, the work of a Jew is done.
Oh, so, the work of the Jew. Yeah. So yes, everybody's view of what their role is in improving the world or repairing the world. It can be whatever your personal skill is. And this is, I think we just finished, I don't know if it's Disabilities Month or Jewish Disabilities Month, but we focused on abilities, not disabilities. And regardless of what talents one has, there's always something that you can do to make the world a slightly better place. You may be, operating as a 5-year-old when you're a 50-year-old, but there's still something that positive that you can be providing to others around you or to your community. So yeah, I mean, there are obviously Jews who are very political. There are Jews who are very much involved in the environment, environmental causes. As you know, Shalina, I'm involved in interfaith work, which is trying to bring people together, values and understand differences. It's not to be in sync with one another, but also to appreciate the fact that we're different and we see things differently and come from different places. So not physically, but from different emotional and psychological and understanding places. So yeah, repairing the world is not defined by doing any one thing. It's by you doing what you personally can do to help better the world, better your community in any way you feel is your strength, what you can do.
Shalina, you had in the chat about the Kabbalah.
Yes, and I don't want to take too much time, but we were talking about this in my portion also. Then people are more spiritual, or they are more towards the I don't want to think about God lane. So I think the Kabbalah, they might have a different view about where they want to be, or their soul wants. They have a concept of a soul more so, you think?
Right. So Kabbalah is definitely a spiritual movement within typically a more traditional environment. But as some of you may know, there was a Kabbalah Center that was created in LA that Madonna was involved with that was perhaps sort of Jewish. I use the hyphen-ish there. And Kabbalah has a lot of numerology involved in it, a lot of don't think about the intellectual components of religion, feel it, experience it, make it your whole soul and live your life with joy and with verve. And it meets a lot of people's needs. I mean, dancing and singing and just joyfulness and not spending a lot of time stressing over mundane issues. And it works for people. I don't happen to know very many people who are Kabbalists. I think I can think of 2 people that I've met that I would say might be in that mindset, but they exist, and there are a lot of them, especially in a more traditional community. And I think that the secular Kabbalists, the folks like Madonna and her crowd out in LA, I don't think I think they were kind of a fad, and they're a little bit less popular today than they were maybe 30 years ago. That's just my instinct. I may be wrong. There may be twice as many Kabbalists as there used to be, but my personal view is that it's a way of reaching some sense of godliness, or touching God. However one can reach God. I was talking about the burial process. I have one of the guys on my team that helps with the burial process. That is his connection to Judaism. He doesn't go to services. He doesn't belong to a synagogue. He used to belong to the synagogue. He stopped belonging to the synagogue. The one thing he does is the burial practice, and he finds it very spiritually uplifting. He feels that it's one of the truest mitzvot, because the person that you're doing it for can't thank you. They're gone. And the tradition is that I shouldn't tell the family that I did it. That, so you can't be thanked by the family for doing it. You're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. And that's his way of connecting to God. He feels that's a very Jewish thing and makes him feel, spiritual. And great. I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I feel like it's important for people who want to be, have that tradition and have that ritual, somebody providing it. I can do that. I'll do it. Not everybody can handle a deceased person. There are some people that would freak them out. We've had people join us for one session and say, not for me, can't come back. That's very brief, because I'm not a Kabbalist and I don't know a ton about it. Other questions?
Yeah, actually, what did you and the Jewish community in general think of the Netflix's 4-part miniseries Unorthodox?
Oh, cripe! So you've caught me in my void. I do not have any streaming service. None. I'm so busy and I don't stream. So I don't have Netflix. I don't have Hulu. I don't have, you name it, I don't have. So I have not seen it. I know everybody loved it, but I can't even comment on it. So.
That's okay. What's that like, not streaming?
I'm so busy. I don't know when I would have time to do it, truthfully.
Excellent. The next question, I wanted to sneak this in anyway. Are Jewish people or people who are not Jewish welcome to join services at the synagogue? And on April 30th, we have been invited to go to the temple to attend the Shabbat service. And we can actually go at 9:30 for a docent tour of the temple. So I just wanted to tell that to the class. But
so I assume April 30th is a Saturday morning, 9:30 a.m. You're not going at 9:30 p.m. Okay.
Right. Precision.
So the short answer is everyone is welcome into services, and that goes for all denominations and all sects. If you walk in and they don't know you, you will almost invariably be, embraced. As we all know, that was potentially could almost have created some loss of life in Houston or Dallas, wherever that was. Dallas, I guess, outside of Dallas. 2 months ago, when a terrorist came to services one morning, and they welcomed him in. They gave him some tea, and then all of a sudden they were hostages. So yes, we welcome the stranger. That is one of the, actually mentioned 36 times in the Bible, that one should welcome the stranger to your home and to your table. If you sit next to me during services, you have two different problems. One is that I will spend the whole service trying to teach you about everything that's going on. And number two, you'll have to listen to my absolutely horrendous singing voice, which I parade very loudly and strongly, because I love singing even if I can't carry a tune. And I figure that that's the one place that I'm allowed to be loud and proud about my singing. So in any event, I hope that you will take advantage of going on that Saturday morning to the temple. There's much more to the temple than just services, because that building is a historic landmark, having experienced the temple bombing as a result of Rabbi Rothschild, who was then the rabbi supporting civil rights and Martin Luther King in the early 60s. But should you come to Temple Sinai, which is up in Sandy Springs, on any Friday night, you're most likely to find me, and I would be more than happy to be your personal docent slash welcomer to Friday night services. We start with some nosh, some food and wine before we get started. We have an hour prayer from 6:30 to 7:30, and then there's a little bit of food and dessert afterwards as well. So anyone is welcome. We do have a security guard. If you look dangerous, he might ask you a question, but I don't think there's anybody on this call that would look particularly dangerous. So
everything is back to normal after COVID now. So like
as of 3 weeks ago, we're meeting in person. If you are not vaccinated and boosted, you are asked to stay home and watch on stream. But if you are vaccinated and boosted, we're welcome back to the congregation without masks. For a period there, we were wearing masks, whether we were vaccinated or not. Now we're free not to wear masks. Anybody can wear a mask, and some people who are a little more immunocompromised are still wearing masks, but I would say 95% of the congregants now are not. And again, we're doing hybrid, and there are people staying home who are still uncomfortable, and services are streamed. But yeah, so come any Friday night. Temple Sinai is just inside the perimeter in Sandy Springs at the Northside Drive exit. I'm more than happy to show you around and answer any questions and make you feel at home.
Margaret, are there any other questions? Because I wanted to ask one thing, but that is a little, I don't know myself how to put it. It's not controversial, but it's interesting. So, but I don't want to take that time if somebody else has a question.
No, feel free. I think now might be a good time also to do our poll since we're approaching the hour. And while we're doing that, yeah, please ask away.
Thank you. And this is something, because all of us are sitting here, it just is profound to me that there are many people in our communities of faith that think very differently about all of the things that we are talking about. One thing about the prophecies of the books in every faith, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, I think those are the ones that sometimes create a paranoia or a predestined, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy in these stories. And those prophecies, I don't know, those interpretations I feel have to be revisited by some intellectual of modern times who can, be more, I think, inclusive about things. David, do you get what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there are lots of interpretations that are, from a modern perspective, from a feminist perspective, from an LGBTQ perspective, from an environmentalist perspective, from all kinds of different perspectives that are obviously not the original perspectives. And there are great writings out there all over the place. There are individuals who are brilliant. There are places that you can go where there are consolidated wisdom, and also even within the movements, there are efforts to redefine and reinterpret.
Yeah.
In broad brush, I mean, full books on one small section of scripture that is taken, and reimagined, reinterpreted, rethought for the modern era.
Well, that's good to know, because you guys started 4,000 years ago, right? So you go first, then the 2,000, and then maybe we'll get there one day. No, but there are great new young people, intellectuals who are doing a lot of good work. Yes. Thank you so much.
So any other questions?
So I will share my screen with the last couple of slides that I wanted to give to you guys. Let me get there. Oops. Share screen. So as I mentioned, I'm on the board of Interfaith Atlanta, and my particular responsibility is Interfaith Speakers Network, which, as I mentioned, is a panel presentation where a person of each of the 6 major religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism, they each present pretty much what I presented at the very beginning of this presentation, one after the other, and then answer questions as you guys have. We would love to give those presentations to any organization that you might be involved with. As I said, it could be a religious organization, but it very much can be schools. It could be, lawyer groups. It could be Kiwanis clubs. It could be anything. So if you're interested, interfaithatlanta.org is where you go, and you'll see there's a tab for the Interfaith Speakers Network. We also, every Wednesday at noon, have a virtual opportunity. It's called a Midday Respite, where we have people of faith who lead conversation, meditation, thoughts about issues of the day. We've probably had more than 20 different faith representations at this. We've been doing it since right before pandemic. We actually started about 2 months before the pandemic. So if you are interested, join us for that half an hour on Wednesdays. You don't have to say a word, and it can be a moment of refreshment in your busy week. I have a personal interest in the next thing, which is the Atlanta Interfaith Hunger Seder, which is going to be coming up in a couple of weeks, April 20th, at Kohemoth congregation out in Marietta. I happen to be the co-chair of the Seder this year. As you probably know, a Seder is the meal that is associated with Passover, and hunger is a problem that we all face in our community, and our efforts to bring together our entire community to combat hunger using the structure of the Seder is all what the Interfaith Seder, Hunger Seder, is all about. Organizations in our community who are addressing food insecurity, like Second Helpings Atlanta, of which I was the president, will be participating. You'll have an opportunity to get to talk with those folks and perhaps get involved with one of those organizations that speaks to you, as well as have a wonderful meal and experience Seder. So if you're interested, if you Google 2022 Atlanta Interfaith Hunger Seder or anything like that, hopefully you will come up with the Facebook page and or the, the Facebook page or the registration itself in order to join us. The meal is a kosher meal, and it's from soup to nuts and $36. So we welcome any and all of you to join us, your friends, your family, and children are half price. Since I have no clue how to get back to the other panel slide, I hit my button too quick. I'll just say that I think one of the things that was on that slide was we have a weekly Interfaith Atlanta newsletter. Please fill out that form and you get whatever is going on. Oh, I know what else was on the other slide. We also will have a fall festival, the second fall festival, probably located in the park across from Ponce City Market, where we'll have entertainment and speakers and fun and refreshments. And look for more information. That's in September, and the date hasn't been determined yet, but it'll probably be early September. So that's that. I'm going to stop sharing, and I can answer a few more questions if Margaret wants us to answer a few more questions.
Actually, one did come up about the Midday Respite. Respite, is it also at the Interfaith website, the information on how to do that?
If you go to the interfaithatlanta.org website, that I think is like the first thing. It tells you what that Zoom link is. Okay. So it's there every week. It's the same Zoom link every week at noon. The speakers are sometimes announced and sometimes it's a surprise. So it's always quite entertaining and quite riveting. And it's amazing what just taking 30 minutes out of your day to be a little bit introspective, a little bit away from the stress and the strain of your day can really help. So feel free to join us every week or any week. We're always there.
Thank you. That sounds great. As anybody want to speak up? I think we covered what's in the chat, but any last words from anybody?
I'll give you a chance, David, to sort of opine on something of a broader scale, if you don't mind.
I'll try.
You know, you showed the numbers earlier that said there's about 15 million people who declare themselves Jews in the world. And of course, there's 7.5 billion people in the world. So it's a really small piece of the whole pie. And yet there's a lot of publicity for people who are Jews, especially when you said, I think about at least over half of those declare themselves secular. Do I remember correctly?
That's correct.
So you have an ethnicity or a faith or some combination of it, which is a very, very minor part of the total population of the world, and yet it has a lot of presence well beyond its numbers. Can you just give your thoughts on why that's the case? I'd be interested to hear what you have to say on that.
So there are theories. Historically, Jews could not own land, could not have certain jobs, and certainly were outsiders in a lot of communities. And the one thing that they could take with them was knowledge. So the concept of study and knowledge and what you know was transportable. If you were kicked out of where you were living here, you could always take it to the next place. So the concept of self-reliance and not being tied to a particular location or to a particular to land is probably a part of it. I think within most Jewish nuclear families, the concept of doing right and succeeding and helping others really pushes people toward getting involved and not just sitting passively by. So whether it's being scientists, being doctors, being lawyers, being politicians, being Supreme Court justices, up until recently, we had 3 Jewish Supreme Court justices out of 9. Now, you just said what the percentage of the Jewish population is, less than 0.2% of the American population, I think. Maybe even less than that, maybe less than 0.1%. But yet 3 out of 9 justices were Jews. Why was that? Probably because, those 3 people just excelled as much as they could and they got chosen. Now we have, I think it's 7 Catholics. Where are the Protestants? Where are the Muslims? But a question for another day. But it's a little bit, it's part of that misconception issue. All Jews are smart. All Jews are educated. But it's not true. There are plenty of Jews, especially if you go to New York, especially if you go to Israel. They're sweeping the streets. They're stocking shelves. They're doing all kinds of stuff that's menial labor. But higher percentages go on to higher education. Education is the one thing that you can always count on. So I don't know that I wanted that to be publicized, but I've just recorded it for posterity, I guess. Thanks, Bill.
We can wrap that up. It's almost 9, so we can stop the recording.
That's okay.
Thank you so much.
It is a little bit of one of those funny aspects. When I said the 6 major religions, we aren't one of the 6 major religions by population. We are by people's knowledge. Even if you go to remote areas of China or whatever, they still know of Judaism, primarily because it was the source religion for Christianity and Islam. But the concept of how it's going to survive, Bill, is a very questionable one. When 70% of Jews in the United States are intermarrying, whether those families continue to have a Jewish home for their children and their grandchildren, it's a big concern in the community. The Orthodox have a better chance of keeping them in the faith, but they're also in many more progressive views, not the right way of looking at Judaism necessarily. So, I'm not going to be around to know what's happening in the future, but I can do my part to try to keep the religion alive, and help. I will tell you that I have been honored to officiate at a wedding of 2 Jew-ish young people in about a month, and they each have a Jewish parent and a non-Jewish parent, and were raised in a sort of Jewish home, and they decided to have a sort of Jewish wedding, and they didn't want a rabbi, so they said, "David, you'll do." And I'm honored to be doing it, and I'm putting as much little aspects of Judaism into the wedding ceremony as I can, and encouraging them to have a Jewish home. And that's what I can do to propagate the faith, if you will. But it's a concern. It's a concern in a lot of religions that it's disappearing, and the young people are not finding connections to the faith. Hopefully, there are ways that educators are coming up with to help bridge that gap.
Well, including interfaith activities like this. So much appreciated. So I think that takes us to the hour. So I think we'll stop there. And David, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure. And I'm available